Welcome from the deep. I am Mike the Finder, and this is another episode of The Graveyard Shift. Today we're talking about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. This is a movie I haven't seen in probably 20 years. I know the title says first time watching, because I genuinely feel like this really is the first time I'm watching it. In my head, this movie was a lot wackier than it actually is, and so I've been kind of walking around with the opinion that I didn't really like this movie because I've watched it one time forever ago, and I didn't care for it. I thought it was time to give this movie another watch because I'm an adult now. I like a lot more different types of horror movies than I did when I was a kid, so it was time to go into this with fresh eyes again. And so that's what we're going to be doing today. From 1986, directed by Tobe Hooper, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. The original, in my opinion, is one of the best horror movies ever made. I think that's why when I went into it initially, years and years ago, I didn't really care for this movie because the sequel is like so mid-80s horror. And the original is so dark and takes itself so seriously that it was kind of hard for me to watch this initially with specifically Chop Top. Chop Top is somebody that I have always felt kind of gets in the way of this movie actually being more horror. He's horrifying, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he belongs in this franchise. I had a much different experience watching it this time. I still despise Chop Top. Do not get me wrong. Chop Top is awful. I hate it so much, and when he picks it off and eats, it's horrible. I hate it. And I've always been kind of the opinion that if you remove Chop Top, you'd have a scarier horror movie. Despite this being a super mid-1980 horror movie, kind of cheesy and sort of over the top, there's still a genuinely scary movie in here. And I didn't remember that part of it because I was so focused on all of the wacky behavior from everybody that I couldn't really see what the vision for this movie was. But this time when I watched it, it felt like I was watching one of my favorite horror movies that I had never really seen before, if that makes any sense. Stretch is a phenomenal protagonist, I think, although I guess you could kind of look at it as Dennis Hopper being the protagonist. Dennis Hopper has a very different story than Stretch does, and they intersect, but it doesn't feel like they're going after these guys together because Stretch falls into the hole on accident. But other than that, I find both of their stories to be wildly compelling. I think Dennis Hopper, what is his name in this? Lefty. Lefty is a genuinely good person, even though Dennis Hopper said that he used her to get to the bad guy.
Where were you? I had to do it. Damn, I used you, girl.
So that's not great. He knows that Leatherface is going to go after Stretch, and so he kind of uses Stretch to draw them out of their lair, I guess. The original house is not shown, and I suspect that's probably because they couldn't get the filming rights to the original house or something. But it also takes place in a different part of Texas than the original did, which is why I'm confused as to why Franklin's body was in there, if anybody can explain that to me. So we have our hero in Lefty, and Stretch is obviously our final girl. Stretch is casted perfectly, in my opinion. So is Lefty. I love Dennis Hopper, and he comes off so cool and badass in this that it's hard to hate him, right? And that scene when he buys the chainsaws and he's going after it, and the chainsaw guy's like kind of getting all weird about it and like cheering him on and stuff. It is such a weird scene, and it's shot so well, which is another thing I think that drew me into this movie. Good cinematography is not necessarily something I think of when I think of Tobe Hooper. That's not to say that he doesn't have good cinematography, but it's not the first thing that comes into my mind when I think about Tobe Hooper, right? The cinematography in the second movie is fantastic. Sure, it feels like an 80s movie, but in all the best, great ways. It doesn't feel super dated. It feels like an early 90s movie almost, with how colorful everything is. There's like Christmas lights down in the tunnels and stuff. Everything's bright green and purple. Take notes, Rob Zombie, with the new Monsters thing. That's the opposite of how you should be doing it. The way to make your horror movie colorful, it's how they go about doing it in Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, because it's a very colorful, bright, well-lit movie. That is something that I was not expecting to get out of this. The cinematography is awesome, the lighting is great, the characters are good. but in my opinion, this is way too long. There are scenes that go on for way longer than it has to, like the grandfather scene with the hammer where they're holding her over the bucket. There's also some points in the radio station that I think we could have lost, but I love the idea of Leatherface falling in love with Stretch, which I think gives Leatherface kind of cool character development, because in the first one he's just this crazy monster, and in the second one he starts off that way because the first time we really see him is with the skeleton like velcroed to the front of him when he's on top of the car. It's hysterical, but it's also really cool and badass. And that's kind of Leatherface's whole vibe in this movie. There's some stuff where he almost comes off like a child, and there's some stuff where he does really horrible things in it too. And that mixture, I think, made this a lot more fun than the first one is. The original Texas Chainsaw Massacre is amazing. Everything really dark, good horror should be. And I think maybe Tobe Hooper might have known, how in the hell am I gonna top this? It's not possible. That may be kind of where this idea comes from. I don't know that for sure, I'm just assuming, because this second movie is 12 years after the original, right? He had 12 years to think about what he was gonna do as a sequel to that movie, and this is what we got. I think that was a phenomenal way to do it, and I think it works. Unlike when we reviewed Evil Dead, which I will link up here right now, as a franchise, this is kind of the only way that you could take it. And the Texas Chainsaw Massacre does feel like they kind of knew what they were doing, but it's not so over the top that it's crazy unbelievable that Leatherface would be this way. It not only gives Leatherface some good character development, but it also takes the franchise in a cool different direction that I don't think I was expecting as a sequel, which is why I didn't initially like this years and years ago. One of the other things I want to touch on real quick is the makeup and the special effects by Tom Savini in this are phenomenal. The grandfather's makeup specifically is awful. I hate it, but it's amazing someone was able to make me hate the makeup that much, because it's gross and they are genuinely scary. And there are some really wide-angled close-ups of that makeup in this. They did it so perfectly. All of the other special effects with Leatherface carving people and all the other stuff that is in this, it's amazing. Tom Savini's one of the greats, and you can really tell why in this movie. When LG actually has his face carved off and Stretch is wearing the face and the cowboy hat, it was almost hard to watch because of how gross it was. The fact that you can get me to gut react in that way to special effects, knowing that it's fake, is kind of phenomenal. And it's one of the reasons I love horror. Special effects and makeup makes horror what it is, especially in the 70s and the 80s. Now a lot of stuff is done through CGI, which is maybe why none of it feels significant. Practical special effects are always going to draw me in more than CGI, and they are beautifully done in this film. And speaking of the skinning scene, the thing I think I love the most about that scene, it is scary and horrifying and not overly gory. They were able to make me feel really genuinely unsettled, and the only thing you actually see is him holding stuff up. You never actually see the thing happening. And that's maybe one of the best things that Tobe Hooper achieves, in my opinion, in this movie, is that it is not overly gory and gross. There are definitely moments, like when LG is getting hit by the hammer at the radio station, but overall, there's actually not that many kills in this. It's actually not that gory for a Texas Chainsaw movie. By the way, if you want to hear our thoughts about the latest Texas Chainsaw Massacre that came out this year, I will link that up here right now, so go check that out if you would like to. This franchise as a whole goes on to have even weirder sequels and remakes and stuff done, so it's one of those weird franchises that keeps dying and keeps coming back per generation, it seems. That's kind of what's cool about the franchise as a whole, is it's always weird and it's always changing. Unlike something like Friday or Halloween, I kind of give Texas Chainsaw a little bit more leeway when it comes to that, because it's such a horrifying story that they're telling. Telling it in different ways is always kind of interesting to me. So I'm a little bit more lenient on the franchise as a whole for that, which is why I think I'm okay with the direction that this movie takes. Now, I will say I'm not crazy about the Leatherface mask. That's, I think, maybe my only complaint with Leatherface as a whole, is I don't like the mask. I thought it was better in the original and scarier, but again, that's not really what they were going for, but I still feel like Leatherface is a scary character, and giving him a weird kind of almost comical mask, that's really the only thing that I have a problem with Leatherface in this, but it's a small minor nitpick. But outside of that, I think the script is good. I think the characters are good. The actors are all phenomenal. the pacing is good, and they do a really good job at tension building many times in this. And those are all things that I was not expecting to get from the sequel because I was walking around thinking I already knew what this movie was because I watched it 1,000 years ago. I really ended up liking this movie. I'm gonna go ahead and rate it an 8 out of 10. I have a 7 out of 10 written down here, but the more I'm thinking about it, I decided to raise it from a 7 to an 8. 8 out of 10. This is fantastic. It's cheesy in all the right ways. It's beautiful, it's colorful, it's weird, it's dark, and also kind of twisted. And for all of those reasons, 8 out of 10. I implore you, if you haven't watched the second one or you hate the second one, maybe go back and give it another shot. Because I know this movie is super divisive in the horror community because a lot of people feel the way I used to, where it's like, it's not serious enough. Why is it so wacky and stuff? There are other people that feel how I now feel, where I'm like, this franchise is weird. There's no way he was gonna top the first one. This is the direction he went in, and I actually think that's pretty cool. So do you like this movie? Let me know what you think down in the comments. I would love to hear from some people that really love the original and hate the second one, and we will respond as long as they are respectful. We're all on the same team here. There's no reason to fight about movies. That's just silly. It's okay to have differing opinions, but let me know yours down in the comments and we can have a conversation about it. So thank you guys so much for watching this. Brett is out for work this week. I was sick last week, and that's where these two back-to-back solo reviews are coming from. Next week we should be back to the original formula though. The Graveyard Shift, as it's so named, is named that because it's like if somebody can't do it one week, the other person has to pick up the slack and take the Graveyard Shift. So thank you guys so much for watching, and we will see you guys next time from the deep. Bye bye.